do this video on sharpening low angle bevel up plane blades. I went ahead, got me a brand new Lie-Nielsen number 62 low angle jack plane and a couple of spare blades. And the way I want to approach this is I'm going to take this piece of African mahogany, and what I want to do to begin with before we go on to the sharpening process is illustrate the effects of different angle sharpenings with different planes on the same material. So what I'm going to do is I've got, for my number 62, I've got one blade that I've just polished the back on, and I sharpened to 27 degrees. I just brought it a couple degrees above the 25 that it comes shipped as, just to get it as low as I could. The second blade, what I did was I sharpened this to 43 degrees, and then I put a 7-degree back bevel on it. And we'll explain all that geometry later. And then what I'm going to do is I've got my Lie-Nielsen number 4 bench plane that's bed at 45 degrees, and I sharpen this blade at 40 degrees. So how I'm going to demonstrate this is African mahogany can be kind of finicky. You can see I've got a good grain cutting upwards on all 4 sides of this. I've numbered them 1 through 4. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the camera, I'm going to hold this up and try to get a real good shot at how you can see where there's no tear out or anything. Then we're going to take each one of these planes or plane blades, and we're going to take a few passes against the grain on this. Because I'm going to be honest with you, sometimes I have trouble even going with the grain, because it seems like there's always a section of this that's got some finicky grain in it that'll tear out real easy. So you see there, good reflection. Really no tear out on that side. Same thing on this side. Again on that side. Sometimes you can see where there's a streak that's not quite as shiny, and that just indicates an area that's probably more prone to tear out. Side 1 against the grain is going to be the Lie-Nielsen number 4. We'll take a couple of passes. Side 2, we'll set up the angle that the blade that I sharpened to 27 degrees. Side 3 will be our blade sharpened to 43 degrees with a 7-degree back bevel. Okay, here is side number 1. We got a good bit of gloss on that, but seemed to hold up pretty good. That was the bench plane, sharpened at 40 degrees. Side number 2, not really a whole lot of gloss on that. There's some tear out in there. I wish I could show it better, but and then side number 3 was the 62 with the 43-degree honing angle and a 7-degree back bevel, you can see a significant difference in that. And there is no tear out in that. Here's bevel down bench plane. Obviously the bevel is put in the blade facing down towards the material. Bevel up obviously means the bevel's up. So with a bevel down bench plane, your frog determines what your bed angle is, which typically is 45 degrees. You can get planes that are bed at 50 and 55 degrees. I know Lie-Nielsen offers some frogs that you can change out on your bench planes to do those angles, but typically your sharpening angle of that blade is only going to really affect the durability of your edge for the material you're cutting in. So if you're cutting in a softer material, you can probably drop that angle down. If it's a harder material, you probably want to increase it. I've been experimenting with a few things to see if there is a difference or much of a difference. My bench plane I just used for this video, I sharpened it at 40 degrees. The range you want to keep your sharpening angle in for that blade is between 25 and 40. If you start increasing over 40, what you risk happening is you overshoot your 45 degree, and the heel of that will then bottom out on your material right here, and your cutting edge won't even touch the material. So that's just a word of caution. You can bring that blade up to probably 44 degrees and have 1 degree relief back in here, and it still may cut well. But anyway, that's the risk of going over 40 degrees. Now, the benefit to the bevel up is that you can resharpen this blade to a variety of different angles to accommodate a different, what I'll call the cutting angle. Whereas the bevel down, you're pretty much stuck with whatever your frog bed angle is. Which, in the case of your low angle bevel up cutting, you can sharpen that and change that angle according to the material you're cutting. So my demonstration was that I wanted to go as low as I could on an angle and probably max it out to as steep as I could to show the difference in cutting that particular material. And I think we could see there was a big difference. So the bed angle on these is typically 12 degrees. Some low angle stuff is at 20. I don't own anything on mine is at 12. So the way I calculate what I want to sharpen that to is my little formula here, which I have C as the desired cutting angle, H is my angle that I'm going to hone to, and B is the bed angle, which in this case that stays consistent at 12 degrees. So the formula is basically C minus B equals H. So an example of this is if I want my cutting angle to be a 40 degree, instead of 45, I want this to be a little bit lower. The formula for me to hone that blade at is 40 minus 12 is 28, so I would sharpen that blade to 28 degrees. If I wanted this at 50 degrees, I would go ahead and say 50 minus 12, so on and so forth. And if I wanted to do this at 55, which I did for this example, you hone the blade at 43 degrees. So that's how you come up with the different angles, your cutting angles that you can use that plane for. Huge advantage over a regular bench plane that's set. You could do a micro bevel on the front of this and bring that up 5 or 10 degrees. But if you do that, what you have to remember, if you want this back at 45 degrees, then you're going to have to grind that blade back and get rid of that micro bevel on there. And all a micro bevel is or a back bevel is coming back here and doing a small micro bevel. In the instance of what I've used on my 62 is I put a back bevel of 7 degrees on there, so that would leave about 5 degrees between the material and the blade, so I'm not risking bottoming out the heel of that blade on the material so it won't cut. But that's the basic math behind figuring out what angle you want to sharpen a bevel up blade to. You have a lot of options there. I wasn't too keen on doing back bevels and things like that previously because I didn't have a real good consistent way to go back and put that same angle on that blade, but now I do. Hopefully this, for anybody that's a little bit confused about sharpening angles on bevel up blades especially, I hope this can clear it up a little bit and give you an understanding that you have an option to actually change this frequently. You don't have to buy extra blades. You can just sharpen and regrind or whatever. But I've changed this cutting angle in the blade I use today several times before landing on just saying, hey, I want this angle here, my C angle at 55 degrees, the extreme of what I'd probably ever use from the low to the high. And it was all experimenting. I spent about half a day doing this. From the perspective of sharpening, here's the jig that kind of freed me up and made it a little bit easier for me to be willing to experiment more with sharpening different angles and things like that. Recently, since I've got my Lie-Nielsen low angle jack plane, I decided to come up with a way to go ahead and put a back bevel on a blade that's consistent, because you don't want to put too much of an angle on here or you risk bottoming out the heel of that edge and not even being able to catch a shaving. So this is set up so I can put a 7-degree back bevel on my low angle planes, and all it is a jig I can set on my stone. I set my blade in here and I can go back and forth, and I can maintain a certain distance to keep that 7-degree sharpening edge. I don't go over it. 7 degrees works pretty good, and it's something simple I can just throw on there, go ahead and clean up that edge every time I sharpen, and I just add this into my arsenal of sharpening things. I use this at a regular basis. Now, as far as sharpening blades and changing those angles and being consistent, if I want this cutting angle at 50, 55 degrees, 45, whatever angle I want this at, if I calculate that I needed a 43 degree bevel on this, I can go ahead and set my jig at 43 degrees, load my plane blade into it, set the jig, I'm ready to sharpen. I can go back to that same 43 degrees every time I need to freshen up this blade through the through my using it through a project. If you enjoyed the video and it was helpful, give me a like or maybe subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.